So let's go to Cameron Richards. Let's get me to 2,000 likes, chat. And please share the live with everybody. How you doing, Cameron?
I'm good, brother. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, man.
And yeah, it's Wednesday. And how's your Wednesday going so far?
Man, I just went to make myself a sandwich and then I went to go wake up my
Nice.
son from his nap. And while I was waking him up, my dog ate my sandwich. But other than that, I
Oh,
can't complain.
okay. Well, hopefully you have more bread.
Yeah, exactly. Just a minor
Yeah,
setback.
just a minor setback. Yeah. So, all right. Well, so what's your God belief, Cameron?
Yeah, man. I'm a Christian. I was
Hmm.
raised in the church. Worked for a church for a little while.
Hmm.
Got burned pretty bad when I was asked to leave the staff. Kind of went
Mm.
through not necessarily a deconstruction, but rather, really had to kind of have that. I feel like a lot of people who are raised in church kind of have to have that conversation with themselves, which is like, why do I believe what I believe? And the answer can't just be, oh, that's what I was raised with. You almost kind of have to
Hmm.
have your own awakening, for lack of a better word.
Hmm.
And kind of to piggyback off of what the previous guest was saying, in our observable galaxy, we're the one planet that has, just the right distance from the sun to sustain things like, water, oxygen, carbon, all these different things. And, uh, you know, I just had a son about a year ago, and
Congrats.
what, thank you, man. I appreciate that. And to watch my wife, go through pregnancy and to watch this little dude go from the size of a sesame seed, and grow and develop and
Hmm.
gain all these attributes, month by month. I think that, for me, it is undisputable that, earth life as we know it has some sort of a creator behind it, some sort of a higher power, just to have us in the exact right spot to be where we are. And for me, I just see that as, my relationship with Jesus, with God. I think that, he's put us all here for a purpose. And, I'm just happy to be living and to be, a part of this crazy world that we have. You know what I mean?
Okay. Now, Cameron, it sounds like you're saying that because there's life on Earth and it seems like the conditions are just right for life here.
Hmm.
If that were proven wrong, that that wasn't because of God,
Hmm.
what would that do to your belief in God?
Man, it's a good question. And to be honest, it's something that, I've thought about and, pondered myself. I know that, even for a little while, I was having some tough conversations with myself, wondering, what if I am, backing the wrong horse here? What if I'm just
Hmm.
embarrassingly wrong with, what I believe? And at the end of the day, um, I think that there have just been some immense experiences, in things like church and things like, summer youth camps that I have felt that I know to be, something more than just, goosebumps
Mm.
or, happy go lucky, ooey gooey feelings. You know what I mean?
Okay. Okay. So you can't get past you can't discount the experiences that you've had
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah. The experience I've
practicing your.
had. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, no. I was going to finish just saying practicing your belief. That's all I was going to say.
Yeah,
You've
and well,
had
and
experiences.
obviously, history is what history is, and
Hmm.
Jesus as a man, extremely, well documented, even outside of just the Bible, and he is crucified on the cross. 3 days later, he resurrects, and there is 500 witnesses who see him walking around with the disciples for those 40 days before he ascended. And a lot of those individuals, the disciples especially, were willing to put their lives on the line and ended up, really paying the ultimate sacrifice for those, not just those beliefs, but for those outright, testaments. Like, yes, I saw him, I believe in him, I trust him, and it cost them their lives. And I think that you know, for someone to see that person and be willing to give their life up for it, I see that as being something that I can really
Hmm.
put my faith in.
Okay. And so you gave a couple of reasons here. So I'd like to tackle the one that you think is like the most important reason that you believe in
Sure,
God,
sure,
um, just for time's sake. So
of course.
I can apply a little test for it. So we'll start with the personal experience. So that was the
Uh-huh.
second one you mentioned.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same test I applied to the just right argument for
Uh-huh.
life on Earth. If
Hmm.
that were if that were proven to you to be untrue, that
Hmm.
and it's to your satisfaction, so it's not just willy nilly evidence, nothing like that. But you looked at
Sure.
this evidence and you said to yourself, "Yeah, this definitely demonstrates that the personal experiences I had, that wasn't because of God."
Hmm.
What would that do to your belief in God? Would you reconsider, or would you um, stop believing in God altogether? So it'd be like something serious enough to make you at least lower your confidence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I I think that it would maybe alter the way that I believe.
Hmm.
Um, I can't,
Hmm.
obviously, I can't necessarily say what I would feel were that to happen. I mean, obviously, we can
Sure.
talk the live long day, but when it comes time to actually, putting boots to the ground and experiencing that, I'm sure that'd be something entirely different. But
Yeah. But it sounds
again,
like it would have an impact, right?
oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, I think that it
Okay.
would for anybody. It's hard to ignore the things that I've felt, experienced, witnessed, and then also to look at the just right angle as well.
Hmm.
I think that you know the fact that we have all these great experiences in our lives, and even in a way, I heard somebody once, because obviously a big question or a big talking point is, if God is real, why does he allow suffering and things like that. And
Hmm.
man, it's a good question, and it's that's another one that's really hard to tackle, to answer. And I think that
Yeah.
I heard somebody say once that grief and pain is just all of the unexpressed love and admiration that you weren't able to give, and in a way that can be viewed as a gift. The fact that
Hmm.
you were able to love something or somebody so much that just because they're not around anymore, you feel immense sorrow. That just goes to show
Yeah.
that you truly did have something so beautiful in the first place. And so
Hmm.
a lot of it really is, it's a perspective thing, and it's coming to terms with your grief and things like that. But I mean, to make a long-winded story short, I think that if I were to have a moment where I've really got to consider the fact that what I believe or what I have experienced may be untrue, I don't know that I could fully let go of the belief that I have in its entirety. Like you said, it may change, it may evolve into something entirely different, but I do think that the belief itself, nonetheless, would persevere.
Okay. I can understand that. I mean, for me, my deconstruction wasn't just one thing, and that completely just dismantled my entire belief.
Of course.
It was a body of things. So I can identify with that from that side of things. So
Uh-huh.
I I would say that for me, the Bible was the most important belief or reason for my belief.
Of
And
course.
when it got to a point when the Bible, I stopped believing in the Bible, that led to a cascade of questioning other things. And then I eventually just realized one day I don't believe this. So
Yeah.
I get that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I can
That's
identify with it changing. Yeah.
that's a really hard thing to come to grasp with, because obviously, if you read the original Bible in Hebrew and in Greek. Translations can be so different, and
Mm,
when it was first translated into English, things were taken out and things were replaced, and it can be really hard to I even in my faith now, I really struggle sometimes to take the Bible at face value, just because it
mm,
is, I believe that it was inspired by God, but obviously, it's written by man. And, like, for example, the letters that Paul wrote to the varying churches, I don't necessarily know that when he was writing those, he would have assumed or guessed that the letter I'm writing to the church in Corinth is going to be, used as a book in the New Testament Bible for, hundreds, if not thousands of years to come. You know what I mean?
mhm. Yes, I
So,
understand. I get it. Yeah.
yeah, it can be really hard. And, things that were written in the Bible, back then, I'm sure people didn't, they had no way of knowing what the world would become, you know, in the year 2025. You know what I mean? So a
Hmm.
lot of what was written, even culturally, we just do things a lot different now than they did
Right.
back then, and it can be
Yeah.
really hard. So I completely get what you're saying.
Yeah. Let me steer it back to your personal experiences, because you've made some really good points, though. So they're very, very interesting points. For the sake of time, as far as the personal experiences go, I do something that's called a like an outsider test of faith,
Uh-huh.
and what I do is I compare that to other people in other religions. So, for
Yeah.
example, if we take someone, well, let me get this before I go on with that. How
Sure.
confident are you that God exists?
I mean, I would say that I'm a full 10 out of 10 confident.
10 out of 10. Okay. So if we took someone who had a full 10 out of 10 confidence from India,
Uh-huh.
and they were a Hindu practitioner,
Yeah.
and they said to us, "Hey, the reason I believe in the singular consciousness and Vishnu and Ganesh and
Hmm.
Shiva is because of all the personal experiences that I've had. I have witnessed things, I have felt things, I have
Hmm.
seen things, et cetera, et cetera."
Yeah.
Cameron, how do you suppose someone like me, an outsider, what method could I use to determine which of you has the true belief?
Man, that's it's the golden question. It's kind of like people ask if somebody was raised up in, in Asia, and they experience, what they feel to be extremely spiritual moments, but for whatever reason, they never heard the name Jesus Christ uttered. Would they get into heaven? For loving the deity that they loved, despite not knowing the
Mm-hmm.
deity that I happen to worship. And it can be really hard. And to be perfectly plain with you, I don't know that I have an outright answer for you, which I'm
Mm.
sure is a super, anticlimactic answer. But at the end of the day, the best thing that I could offer up to you was, just to pray, to welcome prayer from others, and I would just, hope that uh you'd be led in the right direction. And I'm
Hmm.
not one of those guys who, I really struggle with you know forcing my faith onto other people. I think that,
Mm-hmm.
especially people who are, like, holding up, God hates you, you're going to hell signs, at, like, protests and things like that. I don't think that anything that I try to convey to somebody in a hateful manner will be reciprocated well. I'm just to give you full transparency. I'm a firefighter in the city that I live in, and for me, health and fitness is paramount for my job.
Yeah,
For
very important.
longevity. Especially, with the fact that, I could be woken up in the middle of the night at any time. I'm not getting the right amount of sleep that I need. So, because I'm not getting that, I need to take things like my diet and my exercise very seriously. Now, if I go to
Yeah.
somebody if I go to somebody who does not prioritize that and I say, hey, you need to get your fat butt off the couch and hit the treadmill, that's not going to be productive for anybody. They're not going to take that well. It's going to come off as judgmental, as hateful. And even if I mean well, it's not going to be perceived that way.
Yeah.
So I view the same thing with my faith. If I try to spew hate and say, you need to love my God or you're going to burn in hell for eternity. Well, if I frame it like that and it's you have an ultimatum, that's not really a choice. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? That's more being bullied or being fear mongered into making a decision that you may have not made in the first place. So
Yeah. I
for
hear what you're
me,
saying.
the best thing that I can do is just try to, take the love that I feel from Jesus in my heart and do my absolute best to convey that to the rest of the world. And
Hmm.
hopefully, if I can do a good enough job, I can help make heaven a little bit more crowded whenever I leave the earth. You know what I mean?
Okay. Okay. I hear what you're saying. And I appreciate that. I appreciate all that you said there. I'm thinking about what you said earlier about you thinking maybe I backed the wrong horse here.
Yeah.
That thought having gone through your mind, which I appreciate your honesty. That
Yeah, dude, of
that's a very
course.
honest thing to say. And so when I bring up this, this hypothetical Hindu that we're talking about,
Uh-huh.
um, yeah, how would you know if you're backing the right horse or not? I mean, what if he's right?
Yeah, man. For me, I think a lot of it uh anytime that I've felt a struggle, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, the best thing for me to kind of see the bigger picture is hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
um I had a pretty rough experience with my family whenever I was in high school. And for a
Mm-hmm.
while, I had that question, if God, God, I've been going to church my whole life, and I've dedicated, my Sundays and my Wednesday nights and my weekends to doing things with the church, with the youth group, and I've done my best to be the servant, and this is the treatment that I get. Why is that? And it
Mm.
wasn't until honestly, maybe a year and a half ago that I kind of had this aha moment where I realized, had the things that happened in my personal experience not happened, and my family didn't play the cards they played and go the route they did, I would not have ever moved to the city I live in now, where I met my who is now my wife, and therefore wouldn't have had the little boy that I look at every day and I'm watching grow up. And so for me, you know uh, I feel confident enough to say that I'm backing the right horse, because even when I was struggling and when I was wrestling with these thoughts, even if it was painful for a season, I came out of it for the better you know
Yeah,
um
yeah. I That makes sense. I hear what you're saying there.
and now
And
that's just my personal, that's my personal experience, my personal
yeah,
take.
your personal experience. Yeah.
And
And it's
to
just
be
it's
to
unique
be
to you. That's
Yeah, and
fair.
to be perfectly honest, I'm not the most well versed, biblically. I can't quote scripture, that pertains to everything that I feel on a whim like some
Hmm.
people can. But nonetheless, I feel in my heart what I know to be true, and all I can
Hmm.
do is just try to convey at least a little bit of that joy to other people, maybe just so that
Yeah.
they can, ask like, hey, you've got such a light around you, you feel so positive, you feel so optimistic. What is it about Cameron, that's different? What does he have in his life that's making him feel that way, that I'm missing? And then
Hmm.
through that, maybe I get the chance to you know tell my story, give my experiences, and maybe lead that person to
Okay.
make those same decisions that I've made.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. And so if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that because of these personal experiences, this some things have happened in your life There were some challenges, but then there were some good things that happened, like you met your wife, um, and and also it seems like you're attributing your belief to being the light, attributing your belief to being the light, you know, making life better. Like we
Yeah,
alluded to earlier, bringing as many heaven people to heaven as you can with you, or
yeah,
being responsible
absolutely.
for as many. Yeah, and does that mean though that this Hindu that we were talking about has
Hmm.
that doesn't have that ability because of his belief?
I mean,
Like he couldn't meet his future wife, and he couldn't, help people, tap the singular consciousness and things like that.
no,
Is
for
is
sure.
that?
Yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
not. No, I'm not saying that necessarily at all. It gets really hard for me to really figure out, like, if I were to meet somebody who was Hindu or was Muslim, and they said, I want you to tell me why I should believe in your God and not my God. I really struggle, and I sometimes wonder, would I even be up to the task to properly convey, the or properly represent is a better word, to represent the God that I
Hmm.
believe. Would I be that? Could I be that guy? And
Yeah.
sometimes I really struggle with that, because I have all these feelings and all these emotions and experiences that I've had, but to put that pen to paper and to really you know articulate that, it's challenging. It's really hard.
Hmm.
And like I was saying earlier, it can be hard to tell somebody, I think you're wrong. That can be very uh it can be very hard to do without it coming off as confrontational,
Right. Now, are we talking about telling someone they're wrong though, versus saying these are the reasons I believe?
Right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's a difference, right?
A hundred
So,
percent.
okay. And so I think where I'm going with this is, if this Hindu is capable of having the same exact outcomes that you have,
Hmm.
um, can rely on personal experience to form their belief, and form a strong confidence in the singular consciousness. It's almost like we're using the same method
Hmm.
to solve the same math problem, yet coming up with
Sure.
different answers.
Yeah.
So when there can only be one answer, and I think that's where I'm going with this, is that if we're all coming up with different answers, how can you possibly say that you're 100% confident in your answer?
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for me to be 100% confident and for somebody else to be 100% confident in a completely different thing is a little bit contradictory. Um,
Right? Wouldn't that give you pause though? Like, doesn't that make you think about that?
it absolutely does, and I've almost, wondered in my life, what if we're all, you know, uh, what if we're all kind of going to the same source, just taking a different way to get there,
Or
and
yeah, yeah.
I know that can be especially for, I can't speak for other religions, of course, but for Christianity, that can be a super controversial thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
People hear that, and they automatically think, that I'm doubting my faith in God, or something like that. But I also happen to, I think that science and religion, rather than opposing each other, I think they really go more hand in hand than anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, I don't think that I don't think the Earth is just 10,000 years old, for an example. I
Mm-hmm.
do believe that we're looking at millions and billions of years of development and evolving from a rock floating through space to what we know today. And in the book of Genesis, Moses is writing for the first chapter, all the different days that God spent creating the earth. And I've always wondered, what if when Moses was speaking to God, Genesis 1 is more of a journal log, you know, like on day 1, God told me that he created the heavens and the earth, and then on day
Hmm.
2, and then on day 3, and it's really, rather than it being a specific day, especially because, eternity knows no time, knows no currency, knows no age. Um, it makes me wonder, what if rather than to be taken literally, it's more of a journal entry to be taken,
Hmm.
and I also think that, Jesus, taught in parables, taught in metaphors, because it's the best way to get his message across, to convey what he's trying to say. And I think that that can still be applied even today. Not everything has to be taken 100% literally. It can be, metaphorical. It can be, parable in its essence. So uh man, I don't know that I have, an outright answer to say, just because a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Hindu feels equally as confident in themselves as I feel in myself, I can't say for certain, that it would stop my faith or
Hmm.
debilitate me. And
That's
it also,
honest.
it almost makes me wonder, is there some truth to everything that we experience, to everything that
Yeah.
we as, varying believers feel, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah.
again,
I
I know
understand
I
that.
know that can be controversial to say, but uh, if all these people from different parts of the world who did not talk to each other come to more or less the same conclusion, then there has to be something there that's making them feel that way, even if it is a little
Hmm.
bit different in essence.
Yeah. What do you think God would think if you just said something? And I'm not saying this is true or not. I'm just kind of throwing out a number here.
Sure.
If instead you said 100% confident,
Uh-huh.
you said, I think I'm about 70% sure.
Hmm.
How do you think your belief would you see any impact to your belief, or do you think God would
Um,
see you any differently?
I don't think that he would. And the reason that I feel that is because I view, like the scripture says, I view a lot of, religion, a lot of my spirituality as, a marriage. It's a marriage between myself and God. The same way that I
Mm-hmm.
have a marriage to my wife. And when I gave my vows to my wife, I didn't say, I promise to love you, you know but only when it's easy,
seventy
and only
percent of the
when,
time, yeah.
yeah, exactly, and
I hear
so
you. Yeah, makes
there have
sense.
been,
That makes
there have
sense.
been times where, I might get really upset at my wife. I may, not want to talk to her. I may even say things, to her that are hurtful, and that, when I'm not in the heat of it, I don't even mean. But I never stopped
Mm,
loving her, and more importantly, I never, left. I never, just abandoned that. And
yeah.
so in the same way, I mean, like I said, I experienced some pretty bad church hurt whenever I left the place that I was working for. And for a little while there, man, I was maybe, you know, 40 to 50% confident. I mean, it
Mm,
really,
mm,
did a toll on me. But I didn't get into this game just to bow out when it gets hard, or when it gets difficult, or when I get
yeah.
pissed about the situation I'm in. I'm in it for the long haul, and in the same way that I think that my marriage with my wife is stronger from, the difficult conversations and experiences we may have. I think that my relationship with God is the exact same. Like, yeah,
Mm,
there's going to be times where I'm angry, where I'm not confident, where I maybe even feel abandoned. But to quit something prematurely is to do a disservice to the vow or the feelings
yeah,
you felt in the first
I hear
place.
that. What would you say then is I hear a few themes that are kind of circling around,
Yeah.
and I agree with you. Like if I said to my wife, "Hey, babe, I only love you 70% today," I don't think that's going to go over very well. I'm
Right.
gonna have to look. I'm gonna have to look for a new place to live. I think that's not going to go over well. So I get it from that perspective. Although you, and I agree with you. I mean, there are times that I drive her crazy. There are times she drives me crazy. And I'm not going anywhere. I've already,
Yeah.
and I say that a lot to her. It's like, baby, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. So you're stuck with me. And what's the difference though between commitment and faith, would you say?
Um, I think that, faith perseveres where commitment may fail to present itself.
Mm.
Um,
Can, can you be faithful and not committed, or vice versa? Be committed
uh,
and not faithful?
I mean, I think that on paper you can, sure, but if I make a vow to okay, here's a way that I can frame this. If it's true faith, if it's a true relationship, um, there is a due diligence or a desire in your heart to try your absolute best. You know,
Uh-huh.
now obviously I am far from perfect. I make a lot of mistakes, on a small and large scale, both. But
Yeah.
to kind of frame it, back to my wife, I can make a vow that I'm going to love and cherish her with everything that I have. But if I turn around and start talking to some side piece, like, yeah, I may on paper be committed to marriage, but in reality, my wife probably wouldn't have very much faith in me if I'm going,
Yeah, for real.
if I'm going to the gym, or like with my job as a firefighter, I'm not at the house every third day.
Mm-hmm.
Every third day I'm spending 24 hours at a fire hall, and it
Mm-hmm.
takes both faith and commitment, from my wife to
Takes
trust
both.
in me
Yeah,
to do the right thing,
for
and
real.
to
Yeah.
to to stay committed to the vows that I made. And in the same way, I think that, I can, you know, pray a little prayer on a Sunday morning at church and, accept Jesus into my heart. But if I just make that vow and then there's no commitment to that, I don't think that that's real. That's not real faith to me. There should
Yeah.
be, uh, you know, I have this, this vow and this commitment and this faith in my wife that makes me want to strive to be the best husband and the best father possible. And
Yeah.
in the same vein, I've got this faith in God and I've got this commitment to, my religion and my relationship with Him, and I want to strive to be, the best man of God that I possibly can be. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
I'm not using my faith as a get out of hell free card. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
How do you define faith?
I think that, man, faith is. I think it's what you rely on and what you kind of tally up whenever any other avenue of good fails to present itself. I mean, obviously you think
Okay.
about, the book of Job, where,
Mm-hmm.
you know, God takes everything away from this man, and he's got no family, no land, his health is gone, even, and yet despite all that happening, he refused to give up his faith in the Lord, and
Mm-hmm.
through that he saw abundances and blessings. So if I think that,
Yeah.
if I don't feel heard, if I don't feel blessed, if I don't feel like God, if I feel that God has me on the back burner, I think that faith is what, kind of keeps that engine going and saying that, I gotta, let God do his thing. I may not see the bigger picture right now. I heard somebody once say that God is God's love is like a tapestry, and the tragedy of being human is that we only get to see it from the backside with all of the threads and the muddied colors, and we only get a hint at
Mm-hmm.
the true beauty that is on the other side.
Okay.
And I
Now,
think that I think that faith is just that driving power that kind of keeps you going when you are really struggling to see those big, beautiful colors.
okay. What other areas of your life do you have faith in the same way that you have your faith in your God? For example,
Yeah.
if your wife were able to do to you what God did to Job,
Uh,
would you still remain faithful to her?
I, I think that
It's
I
not really a
would.
trolling question.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
no,
a trolling question, but it's I'm trying to like understand like,
yeah,
faith
no,
in
dude,
different things.
it's
That's
a
what I mean.
very good mental exercise, you know. I mean, another area where I have to have a lot of faith is, I've got to have faith in my guys at work. If I'm
Yeah.
going into a building that's on fire, and I get trapped, or if I run out of air, I've got to have faith that my guys are gonna pull me out,
For real. Yeah.
and
That's a great example. That's a great
and
example.
and
For
it can,
real.
and like kind of like what we were saying earlier, it's easy when we're at the dinner table, breaking bread together to say, yeah, I've got faith in these guys. But when boots hit the ground and I'm looking at this building and there's fire coming out of the doors and the windows, it can be really scary to go in there. You start asking those
Yeah.
questions. What if this person can't lift me? What if I'm boxed in and they don't know how to navigate? What if they can't,
Yeah.
effectively change out my regulator and I don't get air in time? Things like that.
Hmm. And I
Um,
imagine, yeah, there's a heavy dependence on teamwork here, right?
a
And
100% there
so
is. Yeah,
yeah, so
absolutely.
I imagine something to the effect of what if even the guy in the back doesn't like connect the hose properly or something like that,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah,
and you don't
absolutely.
get water and you're inside or the water runs out and you're
Yeah.
inside and surrounded by yeah. So I imagine yeah, it takes a lot of faith in your guys in your team
Yeah. Yeah.
to
But
so that not only you get the job done but you get out alive.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I have the faith to know if something were to happen, my guys are going to do everything they can. They're going to get me out of there,
They're going to get you
and
out of there. Yeah.
another, unique perspective with that is, obviously we run a lot of medical calls too. We run car accidents, overdoses, asthma, severe asthma attack, people who, need CPR and
Hmm.
things. And, these families who are having these terrible, terrible days, they call 911 and we show up and they don't know who I am. They don't know, a single thing about me other than the uniform I'm wearing, but they're putting their faith in me as an individual to
Hmm.
do everything in my power to get that person that they love back to the way that they need to be. And,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes, unfortunately, everything that I can do, it's not enough. It's just not enough. Whether
Hmm.
we don't get there fast enough, or the injuries are too severe, or whatever have you, and we may not get to save. Not everybody gets to go home every time.
Yeah.
But you know, uh, to know that I did my very best, and to know that my guys are going to do their very best, I know that. Um, God is doing the very best that he can with me as well. And the outcome
Mm.
may not always be what I want or what I think should be done. But then again, if I were in control of every aspect of my life and had been since the day I was born, I would be in a rough spot because I had to have a lot of, tough lessons and, a lot of, learning to get to where I am today. And I've still got a
To
long
where
way to
you're at.
go on top of that,
Yeah. Yeah. I can identify with that statement too. And what really interests me about faith is that how it manifests differently in different situations. Like for example, you brought up when you're working as a
Yeah.
firefighter, you got faith in your teammates, faith in your
Hmm.
coworkers. Uh, as a first responder, other people have faith in you
Yeah.
that you'll show up and that you'll
Hmm.
help them, that you can treat their injuries. And the interesting thing about that type of faith doesn't quite apply to God, does it? If because God, it seems like has a different type of faith in that
Hmm.
it's not like an immediate response or
Yeah.
if does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. I've always categorized them as uppercase faith and lowercase faith.
That's a
Um,
good way to put it.
you
That's a good
know,
way to put
uh,
it.
I've got lowercase faith in my guys. I've got
in your
lowercase
guys.
faith. Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah,
I would even go as far as to say that, I've got lowercase faith in my wife because we're all only human. We're gonna make
that
mistakes.
makes yeah, that's a great way to put it. And you're right because like say if you're if you're at the fire station, at the station for 3 4 days or how your shift,
Yeah,
and and repeatedly she's not there when you get home, that's going to shake your little lowercase faith. I would
yeah,
understand that, and vice
absolutely,
versa. Yeah,
a
like
a
if
hundred
you
percent.
yeah, same here. If my wife wasn't here consistently and just I have no idea where she is, and vice versa, that would definitely shake my faith.
Yeah, it can be hard, and
Yes, definitely.
I feel like a lot of times, Christians will uh kind of, by happenstance, put some lowercase faith in God,
Mm,
and
mm,
if they're praying for that, that new job or that, to finally get that big raise or whatever, and it doesn't come in, a timely manner or in the avenue they expected, it kind of rattles their faith in God a little bit. And I think that
mm.
for me, a lot of it, like kind of like I said earlier, it's perspective and it's hindsight as far
Yeah,
as uppercase faith for me.
yeah, yeah.
Even though I may, suffer a little bit, or I may, be let down, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not being looked out for.
Okay. Yeah.
I heard somebody once say that, sometimes to get spiritually fit, you have to get spiritually sore.
Mm.
Which again, that's a very easy way for my simple firefighter brain to hear it, because I think about, going to the gym, like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Uh-huh, sure, sure. But I mean, it's the same thing,
Yeah.
you don't build muscle, you don't get fit without having some days where you're super sore, and the last thing you want to do is go back into that gym.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in the
Makes
same way,
sense.
there may be days where I do feel, let down. I feel angry at God. I feel like, I'm on the back burner. He doesn't have my best interest in mind. But again, if I only, give him thanks or give him praise when it's easy, that's not a real relationship. I don't
Mm.
just I don't come home, when I'm dog tired and want to do nothing but go lay down in my bed and treat my son any different than I do when I'm well rested and ready to play. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and I think that also, having my own son, and looking into his eyes, and seeing all this wonder and stuff. I mean, I know that it's just a fraction of the love and care that God must feel for me being his son, you know
Hmm.
so that's almost been another way to really kind of put some more perspective on it for me, and there's going to be my son's only a year old, but there's going to be times when I do things for him that he's not going to like, that are going to
Oh,
make
of
him
course.
mad, that are going to, make him feel like I don't care about him. But at the end of the day, I know that because I'm the dad, and I have the hindsight and the experience to know better, I'm doing it for the betterment of his life on in the long run. And
Mm.
I'm
Mm.
fully confident that God's doing the same thing for me. Um,
Mm.
just like, yeah.
Mm.
So
Yeah, I gotcha.
there's a lot of avenues and a lot of experiences, and I know that I'm just one guy, but I know that there are a lot of other people who feel very similar to the way that I do, with the
Hmm.
perspectives, and being able to kind of wrestle with God in a way that is healthy. And I think that a lot of times Christians are afraid to say that they get angry at God. I get angry at God often. But again, I think that that's a healthy relationship. I'm going
Mm.
through a bit of a rough patch with my family right now. And it took me a little while to realize, if you don't have, little spats back and forth every now and again with somebody, you're not really growing with them.
Yeah. Let me let me ask you
I
this.
with my wife and 25 years of being married. Like,
Yeah,
what do you guys do then? Like, is that even
yeah,
a real
exactly.
relationship?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Um, let me jump in. I have a couple more questions, and I'll move
Yeah,
on
of
to another
course.
guest. Now, I like the distinction you made between the little lowercase faith and the uppercase faith,
Uh-huh.
and it dawned on me that I'm wondering if faith, the lowercase faith, is
Hmm.
actually trust. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it definitely could be. I think that
Yeah.
to say that I trust, I trust my wife, I trust my coworkers, I trust my parents, or whatever have you.
Hmm.
It can definitely be the same thing, in the same way that you may
Yeah.
say that you trust God, or you trust, Allah, or whatever you may be, prescribing to.
Yeah. Because then in faith, it seems to me that like if you take the Hebrews 11:1 version of faith,
Uh-huh.
if you take that version and there's other definitions that like somebody said earlier in the chat, it's faith is belief without evidence.
Uh-huh.
And if you take it from that standpoint, trust. Oh, I hear your son. Hey, little guy.
Yeah, sorry.
No, no, no. All good. Hey, this is family friendly, so it's all good. Um,
Absolutely.
the like when I think of trust, I can't like my name is Trust but Verify, and
Uh,
the reason it is that it's to believe what somebody says yet still verify that it's true. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and so not just blindly believe something.
Hmm.
And as far as, and I'm not saying that faith is blind belief. I don't. I'm not going that far. What I'm saying though
Sure.
is that um, like with trust, you get a return for that trust,
Hmm.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Like you get
Yeah.
you get feedback, and that confirms to you, yes, I can trust this. You get verification. You get verification,
Yeah.
like with your wife, like with your coworkers, with your
Yeah. And
teammates.
in that same vein, trust can be broken.
Absolutely, yes, it can be broken, and that's the verification, right? That's the
Yeah.
verification. Okay, I can't trust this person. Like if there's a dude on your team that he's not behind you, and you're
When he
like,
should
hey,
be.
what happened to him?
Absolutely.
When he should be, you're going to be thinking twice then, or at least you may even have a talk with him, right?
Of course.
Like, hey, what happened? What happened, man? And and you go from there. And I think that's kind of where I'm going with that is
Hmm.
um, how come God gets the big letter faith and
Hmm.
then not the faith/trust?
I think
Like,
for
why is
me,
that
it's
reserved for God? Yeah.
yeah. For me, it all boils down to being uh, the creator, being a higher intelligent being, and seeing things and knowing things that I'll never
Mm,
get to see or never get to know. Like
okay.
I can trust my captain at work, and if I, really bust my butt and study and learn, I can one day get to that level of knowledge and intellect and experience.
Yeah, because you see it.
But
It's
but there's
it's
nothing.
it's right
There's
before you.
Exactly, but there's nothing that I can ever hope to possibly do to get on God's level. And
Mm,
because
mm,
of that, like I have no way to, spark life into, a womb. I have no way to place a planet, right in the perfect spot to, sustain things like water, like life, to
hmm
have the exact right, calculations in the universe. And
hmm
in that way, I know that, with God, I'm merely looking through a keyhole, whereas He's able to open the whole door.
mm,
So for me, that faith and that trust in the Lord, uh, fails to be broken just because I know that there's no room for error in that. There's no
got it.
human mistakes. There's no
Okay.
faults.
Okay.
It may not be. like I said, it may not be the outcome that I hope for, that I anticipate, but nonetheless, it is ultimately going to be what is the best for me. And
Yeah.
my own experiences, looking back in my life, even in the, big or little things, that just further goes to solidify that for me.
Yeah. All right. Last question, Cameron. Um, can you ever imagine what would it look like if um, oh no, let me get the words right.
Yeah, of course.
Is faith really necessary?
Um, I, I think that it is, only because I think that without faith, when things get tough, it's a lot easier to bow out. And
Mm,
that can be with upper and lower case in my experience.
yeah.
You can go to church every Sunday, and you can say that you believe in God, but without faith, when you lose that job, or when you get in that car accident or whatever, it's going to be really hard to continue that relationship, if you could even call
Okay.
it that in the first place.
It.
So do
Yeah.
I think that faith is, do I think that every single person in the world should have faith? I don't know if that's necessarily for me to say, but I know that for me specifically, I have to have that faith, in the Lord, just because I know that when times get tough, that faith is what I have to rely on, to know that things are going to work out even when I can't see it.
If you if God were able to be discerned through
Hmm.
your five senses,
Hmm.
see, taste, feel, touch, etc.,
Yeah,
would you still have the big letter faith?
I, I think that I would. Um,
Mm, mm.
I think that just
Why?
now. Do you mean like, if I were to like have like I get awoken by the Lord in the middle of the night, one time, or is it something like, do you mean like a continuous thing that I can see, touch, taste, feel?
In the yes, continuous thing. You can see, touch, taste, feel. Like he's literally standing over your bed, waking you up, shaking
Hmm.
you. Like, get up, Cameron. Yeah,
Uh,
literally.
I think that I would still have that faith, and I think that the
Mm,
reason why I would have that faith is because, if I were able to physically see, touch, taste, and feel Him, uh, anything that he would say, or say to me, or allow me to experience physically, would just be things that are further solidifying the things that I already believe to be true.
interesting. Okay. All right. Well, Cameron, appreciate you answering my questions. Is
Yeah,
there
man.
anything you want to ask me?
Yeah. What is your name? I never got your actual name.
Oh, I go by Trust.
Trust. Okay. Well, Trust. I just want to say one thing, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Uh, I just want to say that I think that what you're doing here, opening these conversations up for people to talk, I think this is so important and crucial for the lives that we are living. I assume you live in America.
Yeah.
Man, one of the great things about living in a place like where we live now is that, we're able to have these conversations, and you and I may not see eye to eye on everything, but just from the short time we've been talking here, you seem like the kind of person that I would want to surround myself with. You've
Oh,
got
I
just
appreciate
you've
that.
got this very inquisitive, you know uh aura about you, and you're curious, but you're not judgmental, and you're asking questions, but you're not belittling. If I say something that you don't agree with, I don't feel like I'm being attacked. I hope that you didn't
Hmm.
feel like you were being attacked,
Not at
with anything that
all.
I was saying. I
Not
just
at
want to
all.
say, man, that I deeply, deeply admire you as an individual and everything that you're doing here.
Thank
And
you. I appreciate that.
I sincerely hope that you have an absolute, blessed rest of your day. And, I look
I
forward to
appreciate that, Cameron.
hopefully running into you again.
Yeah, I hope you come back. Because there was a couple other things that you brought up that we could explore some other time if you
Absolutely,
want.
man. Yeah,
Yeah, man.
absolutely.
All right. Well, best to you and your family, Cameron, and thank you for your service as a first responder as well. Really,
Hey
really
man,
appreciate
thank
your
you for the
service.
support. I appreciate that. I'm
You
happy to
got it,
do it.
man.
Trust. Yeah, you have a good
Right
day,
on,
buddy.
man. All right. Have a good day. Take it
All right,
easy.
man.